All right, good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to call the Gresham Charter Review Subcommittee meeting of January 18th, 2023 to order. The time is 3:03. Jane, if you'd be so kind as to call roll.
Member Dressel,
Here.
Member Fear,
Here.
Member Stroud,
Here.
Member Ardner,
Here.
Member Dennison. And she did share with me that she is not able to attend today. And Chair Hollis,
Here.
you do have quorum.
All right, great. So today it looks like we have 4 agenda items. So first agenda item, public comment testimony. Second item would be voter districts discussion continuation. Third agenda item, charter recommendation draft review for the gender neutral statements. And the fourth agenda item is other items for future meetings. Anything else that we need to talk about before we get started? All right, let's jump in then. Jane, do we have any public comment or testimony?
I did receive a request from Carol Rula to provide testimony. And I am just looking to see if she is.
Yeah, I see Carol there.
Okay.
She's raised her hand.
Okay.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Carol. Welcome.
Thank you. I wanted to make a couple minor comments about some of the information that you discussed last time, and also just some thoughts that I've had in listening to your discussions. Concerning the fiscal impact of adding 2 more council members, I agree with Jane that I don't think it's going to be significant. And I wanted to remind you that in council chambers, there's already room for 9 members. The Planning Commission has 9 members. So that's not a consideration. I think it's, as Jane said, it was good of you to consider it, but I really don't think in the grand scheme of things that adding 2 council members is a heavy lift for the city monetarily. The residency requirements are in the charter. If you wouldn't look back, it was not in the section you were looking in. It's in chapter 3, section 11. And then there's also lack of residency as a reason that the seat is vacated in chapter 7, section 31. So I just wanted to remind people of that. So my kind of bigger comments are in discussing residency, which is a really good topic. I think you want to discuss having, in-district residency requirements for the council members, but also be clear that you're talking about having people in the district being the only ones who can vote for it. I know a lot of people who think of districts and they think of at-large elections, which some of them have. So in your recommendation, I think you'll make that clear, but when you talk to people, I think that's an important thing, that we're talking about only the people within the district voting, and that also helps lower the barriers to candidates to run because they have a smaller area to run in. And when you consider the residency of the counselors, one of the changes that got made to the charter back when we had districts was that if a boundary change happens and a counselor is suddenly out of district, they could continue to run, not just stay in through the end of their term, but they could continue to run for their seat. And I think that was to prevent people from trying to kick people off of council by moving the boundary to be harmful to them. So you may consider including that in your recommendation, because that was a charter change that happened after districts were implemented. And just also think about, the fact that if a member moves out of the district, then of course they would no longer be able to hold that seat. Kind of like if they move out of the city now, they're no longer able to hold their seat. But also think about what happens with implementation, with if you went to 8 counselors with 4 districts, 2 member and 2 winner districts, that is what happens. Do you make all the counselors run again at one time? Half of them, two of the districts would be for 4-year terms and the other two would be for 2-year terms to make the district staggered. What happens there? How do you deal with that? That's a technical challenge that I don't know that you can leave that up to the boundary decision. I think that's going to have to be in the charter. And so going to 8 members does create that extra complication, because you could potentially say some of the seats that are up, the next set of seats that are up for 4-year election, that those become a certain district. You might be able to do something where you don't make all of the counselors run at one time. So that's just another thing that you have to think about. And I would suggest that you include in your recommendation that you have lottery selected panels for community oversight of the district boundary decisions. So you need the experts about doing those boundaries, but having that lottery selected panels, that I think it was whatever democracy recommended. And then one other thing that came to my mind is, what happens if one of the 2 proposals fails? Are you going to put these both on the ballots together, RCV plus your district and can that even be? Or what if you put them on separately and one of them fails and the other one passes? If you have RCV pass without any districts, that's still an improvement with our at-large system. If you have 6 single-member districts without RCV, that's still an improvement because it decreases the area for people to run. But what happens when you have 4 2-member, 2-winner districts without RCV? Does it automatically become that people get to vote twice, for 2 candidates, and you have the top 2? Or do you need to say something in your recommendation for what happens if RCV is not the adopted recommendation? So I don't know if that's clear, but I just think that's the one situation where if one of them fails, if RCV fails, but 2-member, 2-winner districts succeeds, how do people vote? Will it automatically be that they get 2 votes and it's the top 2 in a plurality system that would work? So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I know you're still working on which of your systems you're going for, but perhaps those questions might help you evaluate the challenges going forward. And none of those challenges are so bad that you should change your recommendation, but I do think it's worthwhile to at least think about what would happen in those situations. So thank you for this opportunity once again.
All right, great. Thank you, Carol. I want to recap real quick to make sure that I caught what you said. So I heard kind of a touch in on the current residency requirements and chamber size, where those are both things we were wondering about, and it sounds like they're already in place and solved. Including and one thing you wanted to add was to make sure that we're thinking about in-district residency requirements being that the voters in the district can only vote on their district. Also, if a boundary change happens, allowing the person who was changed out of that boundary to continue to run, which is something that was in our previous iteration of districting. Also, how to deal with the transitions to districting and how that's going to affect the current council rerunning again. Another thing was the lottery selected panels for citizen oversight with district lines. And then the last one was kind of what happens if one proposal fails. What does that look like if, like, say, RCV fails and we still have a 2-winner district? What's that going to look like? Does that kind of encapsulate what you were saying?
You did very well. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Carol. All right. Unless Vice Chair Arnars, you hand up.
I would like to thank Carol for her testimony last night. I thought it was helpful that the council hear from an experienced independent party.
So I didn't catch that, the council meeting last night. But that sounds great. Thank you very much, Carol. If you came and gave your words of wisdom and or support, I very appreciate it. Does anyone else have any other questions around what Carol kind of said, or any discussion around that before we move on? Dana.
Yeah, I'd like to second what the Vice Chair Ardner said. Carol, thank you so much for advocating on behalf of our time extension through the council meeting last night. Also, for the words that you said just now in our meeting, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you're providing us in thinking about how we're going to recommend putting these issues on the ballot and what kind of situations we might put our city into if one were to pass and the other one wasn't. So to be, thoughtful about making sure that any outcome would be a net benefit for the city is really important to me personally, and I imagine for all my fellow committee members. So I very much appreciate it, and I almost wonder if this would be worth, Chair, adding this as a topic on the agenda at the end of the meeting or in next week's meeting if needed.
So specifically the conversation around what happens if one fails. Yeah, I wonder if that's just going to tie in with just our voter district discussion. And I'm not opposed to also making sure we're checking in on that, making sure that conversation happens.
Well, I'm thinking specifically like whether or not we should make the recommendation that the two are together on the ballot as one amendment.
Okay.
Whether or not we should talk about that as a subcommittee and as a possible recommendation.
Yeah, so I think we might want to talk about this in two parts. So one part is going to be, does it change our recommendation? So we need to figure that out first. Is this going to change our recommendation if one fails and it would create a horrible outcome? Now, does it mean, we know where we have to recommend? And the second part is, okay, now that we know we're going to recommend, we need to figure out how to move forward with that. And so I think we have two conversations there, and maybe Jane, if you wouldn't mind marking this down to make sure we do that check-in when we're ready to, when we finally decided kind of what we want to do, make sure we have that check-in to talk about what it looks like if one fails and another doesn't. And Dana, does that sound like that kind of gets you what you were looking for? Okay. And does that work for everyone? Do we all want to have that conversation? Okay. Mr. McConnell, I see you.
Yeah, Chair, thank you very much. I'll give a quick update. And I have been researching this. As you know, you probably know, at the city of Portland faced a similar challenge to the single subject rule, their Portland Charter Commission. And the presiding judge in Multnomah County actually upheld the ballot title that they had when they combined everything. It was all or nothing. That's what the Portland Charter Commission wanted. So you will have that option. That's a good catch. You do need to discuss that. Whether or not the council decides to ultimately keep that package together or separate them, that will be up to the council. But something definitely you do need to discuss. And just to touch upon what Ms. Rulla was speaking about, the council did see it your way after Ms. Rulla's testimony. They are not requiring the council to give their approval to look at other proposed charter recommendations. You are free to do so if you have the time, and you can get it done by April 2023.
All right, thank you very much. And that, as we kind of stated before, we're going to keep plugging in on the things we've been asked for as well as our primary goal, because that's really, that's part of our due diligence here, is that we're going to get a result for what we've been asked for, as well as all the things around it that we can get in here. And does that sound right to everyone? Does that still sound like the right plan? Okay. All right, great. All right, and yeah, so I'd say the only thing I would add to that is the discussion around making it a package or not. We should always think a lot about what that could mean. And I would say we only really want to require a package if it's absolutely required. That's my thinking. Because if we get to a point where we're restricting what the voters can choose, that should be a real hard decision. We shouldn't be doing that lightly. If we're saying, if the voters want one and the other, not the other, and we're not letting them do it, we should have a really good reason for that. So it's got to be, for me, it's got to be something that it would be catastrophic if only one was chosen and not the other. So those are my 2 cents, and then we're going to come in on that later, I think, when we're going to have that full conversation. But just food for thought as we start to get into that. Anyone have anything to add before we move on to our district discussion? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into district discussion. So I guess the first thing we'll do is recap, because we have so much in between all of these that we need to kind of see where we're currently at. My understanding is, and correct me in the various points that I'm going to be wrong, is that we're deciding between 2 things at this point. So a 6-member single district, or, and boy, this, I got to word this right. So 4 district, 8 council size, 2 per district, multi-winner, I believe is all the correct words I needed to use for this. Does that sound accurate to everyone? Are those the two points we've whittled it down to? Okay, great. All right, so let's open it up. Anyone have any thoughts just off of the top of their head they've been thinking about? Member Fear.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In the minutes, we also have in there that 8 districts with a single council and council member, and 4 districts up for election in alternate election years. So our minutes show that we had 3 systems we're looking at.
So do we want to? So that was 8 single, 6 single, and then
4 with the multi-winner,
yeah.
2 members. Yes.
So are we still considering 8 single? I remember I think that our hesitancy was we would be asking for a lot of change. I think that was really the only hesitancy. I think otherwise, as far as I understand, no one felt that the size would be too small to create a problem. Does that sound right? The only hesitancy was we're asking for more money, essentially, because you'd have to pay for 2 more council positions.
The way I looked at the notes, the way I read the minutes was that it was left more positive on the table than what we just said. But I agree
Okay.
with what you just said with what my notes
Okay.
said. Okay. So maybe we should discuss it to put it away, since I've been working on it all morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes to speak to nothing's off the table for us. So if we ever decide, hey, you know what, it'd be a really great idea, it's that 20 member district that Member Fear and I keep talking about, we could still go back to it and get shot down again.
Hey,
But
we already got Carol's attention on that one, so let's not bring that back.
All right, so Member Fear, did you have something you wanted to talk about, like an 8-member single?
Well, given what Carol had just said, because I also thought through the what if one of these ballot measures fail, and she brought it up in much more cogent terms than my thinking had been. And so as I had been pondering the 8-member single person membership, when Carol brought it up today, that would definitely eliminate having us have to recommend a second voting system if one fails, and RCV fails, however she put it together with the many scenarios. So that was my most recent thought. I had 8 members.
Okay.
That's why I wanted to remind you it's in the minutes.
Okay. So my concern there is actually if we do a single member districting and we don't have ranked choice voting, we're right back to square one. We didn't get much. Well, yeah, that's just true, Vice Chair. I simplified that far too much. You're right. I see your head shaking. We're not back to square one, but for
No.
me, we've lost a large majority of the helpfulness, at least for me. So that's my concern. And if we were going forward with a single member districting, for me, that would be a scenario in which I would think that RCV would need to be like included. because otherwise there's really nothing to help with the kind of the 100% majorative outcomes. Vice Chair, I see your hand up.
I think I need some clarification on what your thinking is. If you are in single member, whether it's 6 or 8, and we had no RCV because of it failed as a separate ballot, you still have the same methodology we have today. Or even if you had RCV, it is really not used in its full capacity, but rather as an instant runoff type of mechanism. I believe that's what they call it when you only have one candidate. So I'm not seeing that as an issue.
So my thinking there is RCV helps combat the problems of first past the post that we have. The idea of, wasting votes, the idea of it being a two-party system where you can't vote for an independent individual because you feel like, your vote's going to get wasted. We run into a problem where even if we have a bunch of different districts, you still have, if you're not using RCV and just using first past the post, you still have that same dynamic. You just have it in smaller groupings. So you're going to end up getting the same results, just a bunch of smaller same results throughout the city. And that's my concern. We're going to gain some things. Absolutely. You're going to gain local representation. You're going to gain possibly better access to your representatives as well, just because they're more direct. But when it comes to kind of the idea of opening up space for anything but the highest majority's input, we kind of lose that, and that's my concern. Vice Chair Ardner?
I was reviewing the letter that was sent from Sarah Woke, where she kind of summarized everything. That would be we received that in May 23rd. Do you remember that, right?
Oh. I can look at my notes is what I can do, but that's it.
I happened to look it up. Anyway, she was talking about in our situation, right? If you're going to triage the current system, what's the most serious problem? And in her discussion, that was some type of different voting system. So that's what we already addressed and came up with an answer on. And so she said that was the very first and most critical element. So in this discussion, my thought was it needs to pass. We just have to make sure that if it didn't, it wouldn't destroy the second recommendation. It's not mean, I agree with you that the second recommendation would not be as effective without RCV. But I don't think it makes it worse, and it's definitely not on a par with what we currently have today. So that's how I would review it.
I'll definitely agree with that. I definitely don't think it necessarily makes it worse. And a 6 to 8 member district, single member district, even with first past the post, will be better than what we have today. I'll definitely agree with that. Member Stroud, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. Essentially, like, I don't think anyone's arguing that it'll make it worse necessarily. But the potential outcomes could be that much more positive if we had the combination of non-majoritarian outcomes that are only possible if we have both multi-winner and multi-districts combined.
Yeah, and for me, I think that's what keeps pushing me back to multi-member districts, is even if we don't do necessarily RCV, as long as multi-member districts are in there, it gives opportunity for more viewpoints or more input, which I think really is hard to get elsewhere. And that's it's one of those things that we have been kind of pushing for, different ways to get this. And I think the idea of combining some aspects of districting with some aspects of multi-winner is more likely to get us the outcome if we have 5 different ways to get it or something, than if we put all of our eggs in one basket, is my thinking. I don't know if that's actually accurate or if that's going to be true.
There's one other thing I'd love to say if I can.
Yeah.
For me, this really matters because the polarization locally as well as nationally has felt so extreme since 2020. Well, probably actually more like 2016, but it seems like there are this like growing separation of the political groups, right? So we have these 2 large political groups that are like, it's bimodal, right? In terms of frequency, how people identify themselves. And we're increasing the siloing effect because of social media. We're increasing the siloing effect because we're not using fact-based reasoning in terms of the FCC rulings on what is news, what is facts, what is real. And so when we just keep ping-ponging back and forth between these 2 groups, we're not getting anywhere. And so having non-majoritarian outcomes, I feel like, will allow more space for moderates, centralists, and more civilized conversation about what are the issues that we're actually dealing with, without having that same kind of high stakes, choose your party and choose the most electable candidate type of situations that we keep finding ourselves in as voters when we get our ballots in the mail. So for me, it's much more about like, what is the potential positive future that we can have in our civic life and in our local government? And the combination of those 2 for me, of having the districts as well as the ranked choice voting and multi-winners within districts, that seems like the choice that has the strongest possible potential for us to be successful in the longer haul.
All right, any other thoughts? Vice Chair Ardner.
One of the things I was contemplating in preparation for this discussion was that it might be helpful, and I leave it to the group's wisdom, it might be helpful if we kind of lay out for each other the hold card. What is the absolute bottom line factor that you think is most critical in how you go about making this decision? And then we can see where there's commonality or whether there's variation. And to me, what Dana, Member Stroud, just said was kind of what I interpret her hold card is. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Dana, and you can rewrite or what, edit however you want. But that reminded me that I thought that might be useful in our decision process. Because it kind of cuts away all the fluff, and member X can throw out this and Y throw out that, but you never can quite get to what the bottom line is. What's causing them to want this or that? Okay, and it's not right or wrong. It's just we need to know where everybody's really at the bottom level, at the most gut level.
Okay.
That's my suggestion.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. How's everyone feel about a quick check-in? Okay, so I'm going to expand it just a little. Let's ask for 2 things. Let's ask for your absolute bottom line. So this is, if it goes below this, you don't want it to happen. And then let's also ask for your general, what would you like to see? And that's just what outcome would you like to see? So not specific solution, but what general outcome would you like to see? And that might help us to kind of get a feel for what we're all looking for. So I can go ahead and start to give everyone an example. So my absolute bottom line, I would say that we need to have a system that is going to make it better. and better along some of our metrics, whatever that is, and not cost us so much that we've created a problem. So that's my true bottom line. As long as we're making it better and we haven't burdened ourselves tremendously, I'm willing to move forward with it. Now, I'm hoping we can get a lot more than that, but that's my absolute bottom line. What I'd like to see is I would like to see some pushback against polarization, and I would like to see some pushback against strictly majorative outcomes. So I would like to see in some capacity non-majorative groups or individuals having some influence in our government. Is anyone else ready to go? Member Fear.
Okay, I don't know if I'm ready, but I'll go. And Dana, I agree with Vice Gardner. That really sounds like your bottom line. You need to go back to the tape and type it up. I did some math. Yes, I did some math today, and the math that I came up with showed that the population increase is a 246% increase from 1980 to 2022. And so with that, my bottom line is the number 8. I like the number 8. I think the more that we have is what we need with this. And given the fact that the population went from 93% white to 68% white, if I'm remembering, I haven't looked at that in the last few minutes, we need to have a system, and this is still within the bottom line. We need to have a system in which, to pull from your words, Chair, we don't have a majority rule, a non-majoritarian rule, as you and Dane has been saying, because we need to get this open to the public of Gresham. Generally speaking, regarding my general, I just want to succeed. So Chair Hollis, the way your general point and mine are in concurrence, okay? So thanks.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so I heard your bottom line is increase council size to 8 and some kind of non-majoritarian, like not strictly majoritarian rule. Is that right? Okay. And I want to clarify with everyone, because I think this has come up a couple times in conversations. What I'm saying when I say this is not that we want non-majority to rule majorities, I guess. It's that we want non-majority to be included, to have some kind of say that isn't happening right now. So it's not that we're trying to change or we're trying to exclude everyone who's in a majority. It's that we want to include them and include some non-majorities as well. Because that we're definitely not arguing to exclude the largest percentage of the population. That would be problematic. All right, does anyone else kind of have their bottom line and what they'd like to see?
I'm happy to recap what I said, but I think that everyone already heard me. But in terms of what I would like to see, I want to see effective governance where we're not getting the same value sets consistently being expressed within their silos. I want to see a situation where one group doesn't have to work exorbitantly harder via grassroots campaigns to simply have a place at the table, where the other group doesn't have to do that at all. I want to see a place where there's fairness in terms of the amount of effort and dollars that need to be put in order to see success and representation at our council. And most importantly for me, I want to see an outcome where people who have been historically underserved by our city government feel like the system is working on behalf of them as well as everybody else.
So I got there that what you'd like to see is fairness and what's required for success, and historically underserved populations feeling the system is working for them equally. Is that a recap that works for you? All right. Member Dressel or Member Ardner?
I can go ahead. I want to take all of your words and put them back in my mouth. As I state all the time, you guys, we seem to agree quite a lot. For me, it's very similar to what was said earlier in regards to not necessarily not having a majority representation, but not having one side pick something that goes for everybody, because as Member Fear stated, the demographic of Gresham has changed in quite a lot in the last few decades, and the way we do things in Gresham needs to change and adapt with that. And to key off what Dana said, the best way to do that is to bring in historically underserved groups, marginalized communities. One of my big pushes was, I've stated it before, every 8 years this group and body meets, but somebody who's 17 years old today doesn't have a say in how these things are changing. So, I like to push and say, including everybody also includes the people who this is going to affect for the next 8 years, which could include people under the age of 18. Whether or not they have a vote is one thing, but I definitely believe they should have a say in the process and definitely be heard out. That's probably my baseline at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. So when talking about a baseline of making sure that underrepresented populations, and specifically youth, is being represented, how do you see that showing up in the conversations we're having around districting or ranked choice voting?
For me, it's just including the process that's already been started by Shelley and Member Fear in regards to reaching out to schools, checking with Gresham youth groups, things like that. I have children myself, and sometimes they don't want to be involved in a lot of these things. They think it's boring because they've had to sit through enough classes where their teachers have droned on and on about, these ancient pieces of paper and how they were written, and enlightening them to this fact, reaching out either from a city perspective, from a committee perspective, to enlighten them that, hey, these documents can grow, the city of Gresham charter can change, and you have the power to have a say in that, is very important to me. So the work we've done, any other research we can do with the youth groups is definitely there. Without getting too detailed or too far into the weeds on it, I think we're on a great path, but I think we still have a long way to go.
Okay, so I'm hearing that one of the ways we can get that baseline for you is to make sure that we're really listening to the input that we're getting, and we're weighing that. We're putting good weight on that.
Yeah, just some inclusion in the decision process. I don't know how to phrase what's in my head, but again, even if a student advisory position were opened on this charter panel, to bring that voice in would be good enough for me, because having worked at Centennial, we have a student advisor that comes in and deals with the school board. They report what the state of the high school, they travel to the middle schools, some of the elementaries, they get the ideas from the students, and they bring those ideas and concerns up to the board, so the board knows how the students feel as well. And I think that same viewpoint would be critical here as well. Again, mainly because we meet every 8 years, and short of requiring this body to meet every year or to propose something every year, which we've seen how much fun that has been doing this past year. I don't think anybody wants to do that every year, but potentially cutting down the time on that, or bringing those voices in, is definitely critical to me.
Okay. All right, Vice Chair Ardner.
Let me come back to Member Dressel's comment. Have you visualized a recommendation where the council be expanded to include a advisor from under 18?
Not necessarily. I haven't put a whole lot of thought for me, it's just a generalization. Like I said, with school boards and other committees and things like that can have that type of advisor. It's not necessarily a voting position, but it's definitely something that can help us with that outreach and help us clarify that data. If we have any questions specifically, it's somebody who has that type of experience and mindset that can bring that to the table. But the specific process of getting to that point, I mean, there's enough a leadway and evidence that shows on how to get there in the other processes with many other places that I think that the blueprints are probably already in place. I don't think it would be a process that would be very difficult to follow for us.
So to me, that kind of feels like a separate project outside of the district conversation. And I was wondering if that's something you want to try and like find the blueprints for and put forward as a proposition. I don't think anyone here thinks that's a bad idea. I think that could be interesting. But you'd be on a real tight timeline if you're starting right now.
Yeah, and this is something that really kind of looking at the process, and I know I had some issues in dealing with the reach out to the students and whatnot, and the personal things I had to deal with. But I can reach out. I can look at the process that's already been created and how it was formed in those types of bodies as well, and see if that recommendation fits this process. But I haven't given it an exceptionally lot of thought. It's just more of a we would probably need to look into that eventually.
All right, yeah. So I would say if that's something you want to kind of look into and possibly formalize in some fashion, I'd be interested to see it. With that, keeping in mind that it'll be a kind of a side project, meaning that you would be kind of on your own, or whoever you could rope in to do it with you.
Yeah, like I said, I think the processes are already created. It would just
Okay.
take some research to throw it all together and see, if it's something we can come up with in a few minutes and agree on, or potentially even, work on for another 8 years and come to it with the next body, kind of like what Carol's been doing with us.
Yeah, excellent.
Member Dressel, if I could, just a moment of clarification, how would, in your mind, and not to belabor this because you are on a time certain end today of your meeting, but consider what would you be looking at in a youth advisory type of capacity that is different than the city's youth advisory committee?
And like I said, this is something that just kind of started to form over the course of the last month or so in my head. Honestly, I would probably work with the youth advisory committee, have them reach out to students in schools and other youth groups to see if there's anybody that would be nominated. And quite honestly, I would like to see the youth nominate someone that they trust and respect that could represent them, and have that led by them. I as an adult, I don't want to dictate exactly what they should do, because I think it's a process that they come up with a process, that they elect the person, they present it to us, and that's the person that we accept as their representative. Within the bounds of, normalization of process, and not saying that, one person at the youth advisory committee is the person who has the final say, but I definitely think that, it's a process that could be curated with their assistance and guidance.
So are you thinking like the end result of this would be, say, youth advisory group would have it kind of set that the next time the charter review committee meets, they will have a spot on there for, like, they'll bring a student on as one of the advisors or as one of the members? Is that the thinking?
It doesn't even have to be the charter review committee. It could be, if it's something I can get fast enough and approved enough, we could have a youth advisory member with the city council. I mean, it's, they don't have to come every 8 years just to have an opinion and an idea.
Yeah, I would be interested to see that, some kind of language or thought process around like allowing a youth advisor to be inserted into all of the groups, or whatever groups they can get in there, so that you actually get to hear some input from someone who you will not hear input from otherwise. Member Stroud.
I'm looking back at that assignment that we got from Shelley Dennison of comparing all the different things and then figuring out what our prioritization list was for amendments and various things. And there's two of them that look like they're related to this. One of them was changing the CRC, add number, nomination, or selection process. Another one is citizen advisory committee requirements. I'm thinking that either of those two, as well as potentially participatory budgeting, like they all kind of could weave together into some sort of amendment that we are drafting or thinking about here in terms of like incorporating youth into the process. I wonder if we could, think about that in a, creative way of like focusing on the prioritization list and also bringing in youth to that recommendation.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. The idea of possibly, well, killing two birds with one stone, to use a horrible analogy.
Liz, would you like to add this discussion to a future agenda as time allows, so you can continue with your district's discussion?
Yeah, I think actually what probably would make more sense, because we're now coming up on about 5 minutes. I was timing us on this one, is we think about this outside of the discussions, and we'll put this as a side project. So our side projects we'll do little check-ins, and beyond that we should really be, so if anyone has ideas around what this could look like, start writing that up and bring something back to us of what you think this could look like, and either bring it to us or send it to Jane to disseminate to everyone. And we'll kind of keep that in the back of our minds as we're moving forward. But we should kind of, at this point, start switching back to our district's discussion. All right. So, Vice Chair Ardner, I haven't heard your bottom line and the things you'd like.
To quote the professors, they said, we have all this theory, and then we have context. And my focus has been on the context. That as I see Gresham, it doesn't mean that everybody sees it that way. It's just my perspective on what I see in Gresham. And what I see in Gresham since around the year 2000, with the exception of the last 2 years, we've had a dominant majority vote that represented one particular special interest perspective. And I don't think the city is moving forward. In fact, my sense is we're going backwards from what it was when I first came here in 1990. So what is driving that? And there's two things that are driving that. One is money and one is power. Money, I described in the talking elevator talk that I think you had a chance to look at. And I have one quick comment on that. Jane forced me to look up the Secretary of State numbers in order to make my argument. I had not done it for 2022 for all of the counselors. And when I came up with over $400,000, I was staggered. It took me about 6 hours to process that. What on earth is happening in Gresham that's worth 400,000? I couldn't handle it. The other part that you may not be aware of is that there's a lot of power structure involved. When we first started our ballot measure petition in 2012, business owners would come out on the street. We were in downtown Gresham, and they would say, "Give me that thing. I want to sign it. Give me that thing." So I know there was interest. And then we fast forward to the end of the election, voting night. I asked if I could join with one of the other counselors who was having a election party night at one of the local downtown places. And He discussed it with the owner. We only had 3 people at that point. He discussed it. He was paranoid. And that was given back to me by the person, the other counselor who was on the election ballot. And I said, what's the problem? He said, the problem is he was supposed to get some facade improvements for his building from the city. Okay. And he said, if the mayor knew you were there in my facility, I might lose that. That is power. And power is brutal. We did not get a single penny, not one penny, from a business community in our election drive. Not one penny. All right. So therefore, we had $4,000 and the other side had $27,000. Some of it came from Olympia, Washington. That is power. Why would somebody in Olympia, Washington give $7,000 to the city of Gresham? Think about that. So those are the two. So my hold card then is, what structure can we put in place, recognizing, as the professor said, there's no silver bullet. There's nothing that you can do that's going to fix everything. So what is going to give us the best chance to combat or dilute or minimize or chip away at that power? And so that's my hold card. My hold card is, I want to force the whole idea of democracy down to the lowest possible level, so that the voters have the tools then to say, yeah, we like that, or no, we don't like that. But we pushed it down to them to the best of our ability. And in that way, we can give them the hammer, so to speak. Restore power to the local areas, 2 or 3 neighborhoods, whatever it is. And I think it would elevate them in stature. It would elevate the neighborhood associations dramatically, empower them, and it would interest a lot of people in Gresham, what's happening in Gresham. Right now, they're kind of anesthetized. We're really becoming a very much of a bedroom community where everybody just goes out and as long as my house is okay, I don't care. So to make democracy vibrant, I want to push it to the absolute lowest level. End of speech.
Okay, so thank you, Vice Chair Ardner. I heard, what I kind of heard as a quick encapsulation of that is to empower voters over special interest groups. Does that kind of capture what you were thinking?
To the extent that that's humanly possible.
Yeah, that's what you're looking to do. That's what you'd really like to see is us get some solution that will do that as much as we can. Member Stroud, I see your hand up.
I nominate Vice Chair Ardner to draft a straw man proposal of the thing that was at the very top of the priority list when the entire committee did our vote. And that was campaign finance reform and/or public financing. I feel like that is the thing that fights big money, is creating rules and structure for big money and capping it, or creating systems where there's equity involved in how you run with ballot measures and/or campaigns.
Yeah, so to speak to kind of what you were saying there, Dana, there is a bit of the hardest hit you can do to this is not going to be within districting and not going to be within ranked choice voting, and specifically right now districting, because that's what we're talking about. And I think it's good to acknowledge that the tool that we're working on may not be the best to affect it, and to acknowledge that if we affect it a little bit in everything we do, that could add up to big changes. So that's we can definitely keep that in mind, which is, we may not be able to change it right here, but we can at least steer it in the right direction in hopes of that helping the next big change that gets pushed. Member Fear, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was listening to you. Yeah, so Vice Chair Ardner, Member Stroud, I know that where you're coming from, I feel, with your hold cards are different angles, put it that way. But to me, extremely similar regarding let's get democracy to the people, remove the power structures, and let's make this city a city of the people, by the people, for the people. I think both of you saying the same thing. And I believe strongly RCV will do it, and whatever districting method. Vice Chair Ardner, I share your same concern. But whatever districting method we have, we propose to the full committee will be an improvement to where we're at now. So thanks, Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, so we've all gone through and kind of did a quick recap of, what our baseline is that we need to get, and then what would we like to see. And we can kind of see how those are connecting and how those are comparing. Anyone noticed anything that really stuck out where we thought like, oh, this is vastly different than I thought, or this is going to require kind of a reframing? Okay. For me, I think the similarities were a little stronger than I thought. I thought there would be more disagreement than there was. It sounds like what we're really coming to here is not a disagreement on our base goals, but if anything, a disagreement on what would best serve those base goals. And it's really, the discussion between, I think the discussion is between how important is it to have multi-winner as opposed to how important is it to have small districts. I feel like that's really where we're at. I wonder if this would be helpful to us to just look at that for now, just to look at how important is multi-winner and how important is small districts, and let us kind of wrap our brains around, or maybe just actually start sharing what we know about it, and maybe that might help if people start to hear kind of what's important about each. Does anyone raring to go? So I could.
Oh, wait, I'll jump in. Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, this is where I've been almost from day one, because I want small districts. And then as we've learned from the professors, the multi-winner is definitely a way to get something that I've said how I like, having 2 members per district, So the way you succinctly summarize things, Chair, it is put me back to ground zero. What the hell do I really want? Okay, so I don't think, to respond as I was thinking through your question, the smaller the better, multi-winner. I would be leaning right now, given I'm an auditory thinker, multi-winner would be a preferred method, given what I listened to with Member Stroud and Vice Chair Ardner, bringing it down to the people as most as possible. So those are working thoughts.
So I can kind of give you my 2 cents on this. So I'll start with, for me personally, small district would be my preference, just me personally as an individual. But that's not what I think is best for Gresham. And part of that is because my privilege as a white male, I don't face any of these issues with, being outside the majority vote. Majority vote typically goes my way. So because of that, the real issue I see is I don't have, direct communication, or I don't have the ability to run for office or something like that, because, I'm not rich, and I don't want just the rich people to do it. But when I talk about, what's going to make my decision, it's kind of what Member Fear was saying, which is that I'm ultimately looking for something that is going to help the people who have been harmed and who are being harmed the most right now. And for me, that's anyone who's outside of the majority. In that those people are having a very difficult time getting into this process, more so than everyone else who's fighting with, say, just larger election sizes. Because what we're talking about here is the difference between 4 districts and 8 districts, we'll say, if we keep the same number of counselors. So we're not talking about districts or not, we're talking about essentially doubling the size of the districts. And for me, it's worth having a district that's twice as big and therefore takes us twice as much canvassing to also allow, or to force, in a sense, or to force that allowance for a non-majorative input in there. I think for me, that just, it gives bigger bang for the buck. Now, that's only because we're talking districts. I don't think we should throw out districts. I think everyone wants districts. Everyone we talk to wants them. This is something that I think needs to happen. And I agree with what Vice Chair Ardner was saying too, which is anything 3 or below would not get us what we need, and we aren't considering that. So for me, it's really that the 4-member district or higher as multi-winner is what I'm seeing as the way forward. And that's only limited by cash at this point. I would prefer to have, as many districts as Vice Chair Ardner thinks is appropriate because he's done the research, and have it multi-winner. But I suspect that that's just a logistical nightmare and we wouldn't be able to get that through. So yeah, that's kind of my decision making and kind of why I'm leaning towards multi-winner, and at least 4 districts or higher, because I was also convinced by what Vice Chair Ardner was saying, which is 3 or below, and we're not getting enough to make it worth our time to do that. So how about anyone else? Now you got a little more time. Anyone have thoughts?
I guess I would jump in here and say that the difference, I'm struggling a little bit with Member Fear's comment. He wanted small districts and multi-member. So what you're really talking about is a voting area with about 29,000 people, or a voting area with about 14,500 to visualize it.
Vice Chair, no, those are the two. I'm not visualizing them as the same thing. Those were the two concepts I keep struggling with, one versus the other.
Yes.
Okay, that's where I'm struggling.
Okay, so you haven't come down on one side or the other.
Well, right now I'm leaning multi-winner, kind of like what Chair Hollis just said, multi-winner with at least 4 districts. That's where I'm leaning now. But
okay,
that's where my juxtaposition has been, all between those two systems. Okay, wasn't
right.
You got it.
Thank you for that clarification. I guess I would jump in and say, from my perspective, if you were going 4 districts or 8 districts, I would very strongly go with 8 districts, because it pushes that democracy level down, and it makes the candidates from that area truly representative. The larger the district becomes, the less people, you get back to majoritarian rule. And I'm not saying that we're designing minority districts. That's not the point. But as you bring the district size down, the focus becomes much more local as to where a person's coming from. And frankly, I probably failed in my original purpose of asking everybody to say their hold card. Another aspect of the hold card for me is, does our decision have any potential to not have a guaranteed voting majority for any special interest group, like we've experienced for the last 20 years, 20 out of 22 years. So the smaller the districts, the less, nothing is impossible. Somebody can buy whatever, but under normal circumstances, the local person is going to stand on their own feet, regardless of gender or anything else. They're going to be, it would be really obvious if somebody tries to buy them. And the local people would know that. So those are the points I would lean towards. Very strongly. Actually, I'm not leaning. I'm there. It doesn't mean I can't accept a different outcome. Please bear in mind we're a committee and we're going to have a final decision that we're all going to live with.
And in talking around that, that was part of like the kind of the checking on the bare minimum. Let's really think about that as committee members. What is your absolute bare minimum where your other decision would be, let's throw this away and let's not do anything. So keep it as it is. And that was kind of what I was thinking when I was talking about my bare minimum being that, you know, we're getting some good. We're getting along our lines of some good, and it isn't so burdensome to our government that it is that, you know, we're gonna crash the system essentially. For me, that's the case, and that encompasses all of our solutions so far. All of our solutions so far, I think, are worth going forward with. No matter which way we eventually vote and go forward with, everything that we've talked about today lands firmly within that. So I think either way we go, I'm going to be okay with it. I think I definitely have an opinion about what I think is going to be better, but it does meet my minimum bar. Has anyone heard today, like conversations we've had, where it doesn't meet your minimum bar? Like, so if we go in any of these single district or multi-winner district, does it not meet your minimum bar? Because that'd be real important to hear now.
I'm kind of on the cusp.
Okay.
On that one. I know for a fact that I'm very strongly feeling that multi-winner and having that second place person be the official representative within a district feels to me like the only way that we can ensure non-majorative outcomes. And non-majorative outcomes are the primary motivator for me in seeking changing the system. And I'm fairly convinced that if we only have one winner within each district, the chances are still very, very skewed that we're going to continue to get the most electable candidates into office, continuing, but times 8. And I really don't feel comfortable with that for the next 8 years. I feel like we've had that since 1911 when Gresham was founded. I feel like we've done a lot of really good work here, and I think that we're all going for the same values and outcomes ultimately. And I have a lot of faith in the committee. And I think I can probably wrestle with my own feelings of like being cuspy right now, but I'm definitely uncomfortable with the idea of having 8 miniature Greshams with a first place winner only.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so I think we've had a lot of discussion around this. what I would propose is that we're going to have to wrap this up relatively soon. I would propose that we take a vote to see what we would like to move forward with, and maybe even let that sit for a week, and make sure that we can all live with that, and make sure that there isn't something huge that's popping up, and also let Member Dennison speak up as well, because Member Dennison isn't here today, but is also part of our committee, and I would still really like to hear her input. And we can't put everything off, though, is kind of the way to go forward. So I know this is going to probably be very annoying to everyone who's having to track this, but I would suggest kind of a soft vote, in the sense that we all vote to see what we would like to move forward with, but we still want to hear from Member Dennison, and we may argue about it again on the 25th. Does that sound right to everyone? I think we need to start making steps into a decision. And that just may be where we are. Member Fear, I see your hand.
So you're proposing like a straw poll? Just to see-
Yeah, I guess that, yeah. I guess
Okay.
that sounds fair.
Yeah, that's, and would we vote on each one? Yeah, okay. Yeah, straw
yeah.
poll. Yeah, okay.
I guess that's a good question too, is what are we comparing at this point? So are we between two? Are we between a let's say a 8-member single district and an 8 council size 4-district 2-member multi-winner? Is that what we're going between at this point? Does that sound right? Have we moved past the 6-member and we're saying, look, if we're going to do single, we're going to do 8? Is that where we're at? Okay, I think I saw head nods everywhere. Vice Chair Ardner. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. So perfect.
I was originally in favor of 6, but if you're trying to make the apples and oranges comparison, you want to keep everything simple or similar to the greatest extent possible. So 8 counselors on both sides.
Okay, and then also that also talks or speaks to Member Fear's baseline of upping the council size. As Member Fear was saying, that's got to happen no matter what we do. And for me, that sounds reasonable. And so be it. It sounds like it's time to up the council size is part of our recommendation. All right, so that's what the straw poll is going to be about, is those two. So it's essentially we're deciding between single member or multi-winner. I think that's just going to be the easiest way for us to word that. So I'm just going to go ahead and start calling on everyone.
Wait,
yeah,
I want to make sure I get this, and I recognize this is a straw poll. But I don't want you to go too far, Chair Hall is on me to make sure I'm not losing track.
Of course.
So you're presenting 2 items for a straw poll. And the first one is 8 districts, single winner equals 8 counselors.
Correct.
Your second vote will be the 4 districts, multi-winner, 2 counselors.
Correct.
Am I correct? Okay.
Yep, you got it. All right, are we all ready to go? I'm going to start with Member Dressel. So between the two, which one?
Sorry.
Yes.
That doesn't work.
I am for the 8-member 4-district multi-winner.
Multi-winner. Okay. Vice Chair Ardner.
I'm for 8 single districts.
Single. All right. Member Fear.
The 4 districts, multi-members, 8 counselors total.
Multi-member. Member Stroud.
I'll take strawberry. Multi-winner.
Multi-winner. And for myself, multi-winner as well. So our straw poll showing 4 for multi-winner multi-winner, 1 for single. I think let's sit on that, think about it, see if this is going to feel okay moving forward, that this is likely the direction we're thinking right now. And I want to make sure that, remember, Dennison either has an opportunity to tell us her thoughts on these two, or is going to be at our next meeting, if that works. Timeline wise, Jane, how does it sound if we make a final decision on the 25th? Does that fit our timeline well?
It does, if you meet your homework assignments.
Okay.
And I'd also like to suggest, as you ponder this over the next week, that you go back to your packet of November 22nd. And in that packet, you were given quite a volume of districting information. And one of those pieces was a, well, at the time I entitled it District at Large Guide Sheet. And it was a 1-pager. And if you recall, it said, if you answered yes or no, go to the next question or skip a question. And that may guide your thoughts as you are contemplating the results of the straw poll and whether and where you want to be in your final vote.
All right, great.
Jane,
Thank you.
Jane, can you give us that name again?
It was in the November 22nd of 2022 packet. No, excuse me, November 14th packet. And it was entitled District at Large Guide Sheet. There was also in that packet a district creation list of considerations. And there was a third document called a districting guidelines, including the Secretary of State's guidance sheet. So those are documents you may want to go back to and take a look at to really put your thoughts in order in making your districting recommendation. But I can also help out here by resending those documents. It will not be this evening, so I will, but definitely before the end of the week, I can resend those.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And was that from the full committee on the 14th?
No, that would have been all of you
I
on
must not have-
November 14th.
I see a 16th, a 9th, a 16th, a 23rd, and a 30th.
It would have been the 16th then.
16th. Okay.
So it must have been my creation date was the 14th, and I sent it. It was in your
Gotcha.
packet of the 16th.
All right.
This is so
Well-
strange. I just found mine on the 23rd, the guide
Oh.
sheet. I received it on the subcommittee on the 23rd.
Why don't I just resend those? But
Yeah, that sounds good.
but there are 3 documents in there. I'm trying to think, there was a couple other documents, but they were all related to districting, and it was the first time you all really stepped into that arena. But I'll resend them just to make it simple so there's no confusion on dates.
Thanks. I would appreciate that. Yeah, else we're all going to have to dig through our notes, and that'll take forever. All right, just 1 second as I just closed my sorry, I closed my script. Here we go. All right, so how does everyone feel about where we sit around our discussion in districting? Does this feel like something where we're ready to make our final vote next week while we think about it and have any conversations that we need to have at that point? All right. I think I saw some head nods. Member Dressel, how does that sound for you? Okay. All right. Well, I think that's where we're at for our district discussion then. At that point, we will have a final decision on what we want to do or what our recommendation is going to be. And then we're going to really start looking at what that means. So as Carol has mentioned, we're going to have some questions to ask about that. You know, how does it look if our recommendation, if only one of them succeeds, the other one fails, and a lot of other things around that we're going to have to go into. Real quick check on the timeline, Jane. So if we have our final recommendation on the 25th, what are we going to need to do for you at that point, and by when, I guess?
I would really like to speak very much as has been expressed today. There are very often common threads as to what you all are thinking. And I really would like input in writing from those of you who have not submitted the comments regarding why eliminate at large. I have comments from Ardner, Stroud, and Fear. And I'd like to get statements from all of you regarding why districts, not necessarily the 4 or the 8, but just why districts. But what I will attempt to do is to compile all those into one succinct statement. I'd also like you guys to start thinking about, because I feel it's going to be a necessary part of the final recommendation on this, is to be going back, recalling, checking your notes, checking your meeting packets of where you were hearing that community input for the support of districts, where perhaps in a past presentation, you had a number of presentations way back in April of 2022, where there was discussion, I believe it was from the, I can't recall the coalition's name, but they spoke to wanting the communities wanting to know who their counselors were, to feel closer to them, but pulling those data sources that match up to those statements. And so start thinking about that, start looking at your past material, because we're really going to need to expedite the final report through those few weeks of February. And at this point, we know that the full committee is meeting on the 30th. They've not set a date for their February meetings. It's been talked about before, and it is quite possible that the full committee is going to need to start going to every other week to really dive into some of these issues. But start thinking about it. When you make a statement that, for example, it's what the community wants. Okay, cite for me where you heard that. You've got the Bagwell report, you've got the city survey, you've got various presentations that have been made to you, looks like in the earlier part of 2022. But start thinking about those data sources.
Okay. All right. So that's the ask is, let's get those homework assignments returned and start working on citations. So keep that in mind and just keep plugging away at that, is what it sounds like. And so Jane, what we're going to be planning to do is have that final recommendation on the 25th. And then from then on, I'm expecting at least a couple days where you're just going to have questions for us or just clarifying things with us. And so I think we should have that on our agenda from then on, is to put aside a good chunk of our time to answer any questions you need that are coming up while you're writing this, while you're finalizing this recommendation. Does that sound right or useful?
It does to me, because I do want to build time in that this can go back and forth a couple times. I don't want to create a situation where deadlines are looming on us and you have to make a decision with only one look at that final.
Okay, sounds great. So yeah, we'll keep doing that.
And Chair Hollis, we do need to keep in mind that we lose Member Stroud on the 15th of February. She's gone for 2 weeks. And I ask you to take that into consideration.
Okay. Do we lose you on the 15th or are you here for the 15th?
You know, if we could do a Tuesday meeting on the first week and like a Thursday meeting on the back week, I wouldn't miss anything. I just can't be at the Zoom meetings from the 16th to the 20th. So one day prior for flights, I could do. It totally depends. There's a lot of schedules happening here, so I defer to the decisions that the subcommittee would make during that time if we're not able to change the timing of our meetings.
Okay, great. So I think maybe that's something we'll look into. Let's say, how about on the 1st? Our meeting on the 1st is we'll look into rescheduling that, rescheduling the 15th and the 22nd meeting. Does that, can you make a note for us to check in on that, Jane? Also, I'm going to forget is the reality. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, great. Vice Chair Ardner, I see your hand up.
I have a question on process. We have a meeting with the large committee on the 30th. If we make a decision at the next meeting, we obviously don't have the documentation or the formal language, etc. How would you see presenting it to the larger committee as a soft decision, a hard decision? How do we get their input into it so that we have as much support as possible?
So my thinking there is after the 25th, it would be a hard decision. So we don't need to say it's soft at that point. We can say this is our recommendation for sure. What we might be saying is this is our recommendation. Here's the general outline of why we think this. Feel free to ask us any questions. And we're gonna come back with a much more solid recommendation for everyone to look through the details of. So it's kind of giving a heads up, giving a chance for Q&A because we only meet once a month with everyone. So it'd be great if they could pick our brains on this. And then letting them know that they're going to see a much better presentation coming up to make their final decisions on. That's my thinking. Jane, does that kind of track with what you're thinking too? Like timeline wise?
If you're comfortable doing that,
Yeah.
you do have going to the full committee at that meeting on the 30th. You do have the gender neutral recommendation, which is on your agenda for today with an amendment. You do have the auditor's recommendation. I know that Chair Andaya continues to work on the 60%. I was chatting with him about it today. He looks pretty close to having a final recommendation, and he would like this body to see it before it goes to the full committee. And then Member Stroud, I know of the non-discrimination statement was that you were meeting with city staff. So you've got at least 2 firm recommendations going to the full committee on the 30th. If Chair Hollis, you're comfortable presenting a soft recommendation for Q&A on districts, and then possibly the 60% amendment recommendation. So that's a lot. That's a lot for that full committee to consider.
Yeah, that sounds good. So we're not going to be asking for a decision on the districting from the full committee on the 30th. We're going to let them know what our recommendation is and do Q&A, but we're not going to be asking the committee to make a decision at that point because they don't have the data in front of them. It sounds like we might be asking for a decision on the other 2 to 3 things that we're putting forward, which is, I think that'll work out good if we have a bunch of decisions and then just kind of an information and a Q&A session. Member Stroud.
Maybe I missed a meeting or I forgot, but has the full committee seen the ranked choice voting recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. Slipped my mind. Thank you.
I don't remember. Did did the full committee vote on that?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I'm assuming it's still going forward.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Boy, out of sight, out of mind. As soon as we stopped talking about it, it was just gone out of my head. All right, great. So let me see. We have gender neutral pronouns statement to go over. And there was one more thing, I just lost it, that I was going to ask you to remind me of for next meeting. Does this ring any bells for anyone? Okay. That's all right. It'll keep me awake at night.
Well,
Let's-
we will post the video of this by the end of the week, and you can watch it. And see
Oh,
what you,
that's a good point. All
what
right.
we were
Yeah.
talking about.
If I haven't slept by the end of the week, I'm going to do that. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the charter recommendation draft review for gender neutral statement amendment. So Dana, I think you are up.
Yay. Okay, so I did a little bit of research here. I'll give you a quick overcap. You've already seen this amendment. The only things that are changed are the green language and the blue highlighting was just Jane and my way of making sure that we knew which areas to look that had been altered. Essentially, there's an expansion of the gender neutral language, not just only being used for the charter, but for all official documents and language. And I'd love to share a little bit of research that I did that I might share with the full committee when I recommend it. Is it okay to take a couple minutes to read it?
Yeah, please.
This amendment and the decision to expand upon it to include all official documents and communications matter because the language that we use is critical for creating psychological safety for the people who live here. Based on a Gallup poll, the percentage of US adults who self-identify as LGBTQ+ or something other than heterosexual has increased to a new high of 7.1%, which is double the percentage from a decade ago. Of this group, the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute suggests that non-binary people make up approximately 11% of the adult LGBTQ+ population. Many, but not all, non-binary people use gender-neutral pronouns. Gender-neutral pronouns are also used by people who don't identify as non-binary, but prefer to use them or they instead of binaries. By switching our language to be more open and inclusive, we do not hurt anyone, and it hardly costs a thing. But in the process, we do create safety for some. By doing a little back of the envelope math here, our state of Oregon is home to 4,246,000 people. We could estimate that 7.1% are LGBTQ, or approximately 301,466 individuals. Of those, about 11% may identify as non-binary, approximately 33,161 people, based on the data that I cited previously. If we want our city to be a place that all people feel a sense of belonging and acceptance to work, play, and thrive, which I believe that we all do, then it is time to demonstrate that we honor all people by creating intentional language shifts in our official documents. I would venture to guess that we have some non-binary city employees or city employees who prefer to use they and them who would especially benefit from this move. People want to live and work in places that offer safety and places that were built with them in mind. And I think that we can make Gresham that place by accepting this amendment.
All right, thank you. So any thoughts? Vice Chair Arden.
Member Stroud, I have a question regarding chapter after you finish the charter provisions. There's a sentence in green: amendment. The city shall use gender neutral pronouns for all city documents, including but not limited to blah, 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 blah. Would we be clear if we just said all city communications, internal and external?
I think the goal here is to be very specific in what the mandate encompasses. So all communication might include the way that people verbally speak in the hallway, or in emails between city employees and these other things. And what I really want to emphasize is that official documents that are being published or utilized by the city would include this language.
Thank you.
Member Dressel.
Keying off that, do we know if the city has a policy in regards to communication when internal or external in regards to referencing gender neutral and non-binary pronouns?
If they do, they certainly aren't using it.
That's my question is if they don't, maybe that needs to be a direction we need to as well.
I'm wondering if that's kind of what this would encompass. This would be saying, like, we're not saying you need to create one or not, that all of our documents need to adhere to this.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back a few years when we had clerks that refused to marry people and things and when you're speaking with the public, you need to be respectful of what they choose and how they choose to communicate. And I don't want to create an instance where somebody cites personal freedoms and things like that and how they communicate. If a city policy isn't already created, things like that.
Member Dressel, are you recommending that there's a line that's added to this or a statement added to this current language?
I guess my question then would be, how does this charter drive policy? Or is the charter precedent to set policy in that?
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe this.
I'm not following that question. Could you rephrase it, Member Dressel?
So if we create the line in the city charter that specifically says all documentation, including but not limited to city code, blah, 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 that's great for the documentation. But as Dana stated, it's one of those things, or as I can't remember, it was Jack or Dana, that's not necessarily the communication internal or external to that. Is it appropriate to put that in the city charter to say that all documents and city communication, internal and external, has to do that, or would that conflict with, or potential? I guess this question may be for Mr. McConnell, who's not here at the moment. Would that potentially conflict with issues that have already been arisen in the last decade or so, where city employees feel their personal freedoms may be at stake, or religious liberties, things like that, when they're at work and having to do these things? I want it done, but I also want to make sure that we're putting this in the appropriate place to make sure it gets done and not driving. Let me see if I can phrase this. If we create it in the charter, does that require the city to create the policy? Or if we leave it out of the charter and just do documents here, does the city then have the option to create the policy?
I would respond to that by saying right now the city has the option to create the policy, only because the city has the option to create the policy on a broad spectrum of items. The city has a non-discrimination statement that sits in code, but that does not include language regarding non-gender.
And it's specifically in regards to the communication, because I'm all for including it into the documents as well. I'm just wondering what the best avenue to get it. So when I get an email from a city councilor, if they don't know my pronouns, they're using neutral pronouns until I've defined that sort of instance.
So I wonder if this is multiple different steps. And I think we might be taking two of them right now, which is the discrimination and policy update and gender neutral pronouns in documentation that the city uses and puts out. This might speak to kind of your concern, Member Dressel, is of the idea of what happens if we make it say too broad and then it gets pushed back because we've encroached on personal freedoms or something. Does the whole ship sink if we do that?
So my question, and I come from an education background, I'm sure Member Fear and a few others who have worked in education understand, when you have an audit come through, findable documents become documentation. In the event that somebody goes digging through my email for something and I've specified an improper pronoun, is that considered something that somebody could chase down and say, hey, they're not respecting this document, what's going on? I'm just making sure that if we put all documentation period, how does that cover communication when communication becomes a document based on that type of information? Does that make sense? I guess, am I pulling that too far into the weeds to possibly see what's going on there?
My
Is
thinking
the-
is what you asked might be a legal question at that point.
And that's why I referenced
Yeah.
maybe having Mr. McCall in.
Yeah. I will say though that I think that part of what Dana's talking about with, say, having gender neutral pronouns in City of Gresham documentation is defining what the City of Gresham is going to put out as an entity, as opposed to what individuals have to say on their own. And I think that might, at least if we're talking about breaking it into groups so not everything syncs at the same time, that might be a step that could get through. And an important one too, because now we're talking about the city charter, which we've already looked through and saw problems with, and all city documentation talking about who we serve and stuff like that is going to be gender neutral, which is, I think, going to be extremely important. Member Fear, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Member Dressel, I get where you're going. As someone who taught grammar for a very long time, looking at the way Dana's changing these pronouns, there's no grammar issue that, I mean, it doesn't offend this person of faith. I don't think it should offend anyone. It's just swapping one dominant masculine pronoun to respect the gender neutral pronouns. And as Shelley brought up a couple weeks ago, they, them, is proper pronoun grammar and should not be offensive to anyone. Now, all that said, anybody can sue anybody and things can go all the way to the Supreme Court over language. But I think the way Dana put this together, it should be okay. And and I know what you're saying about having your emails audited. Trust me, I know what you're saying. But it should be okay. I like the way she put it together. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Ardner, I see your hand up.
2 points. One is, I think a clarification might be, instead of all documents, how about all formal documents? In the sense of, this is a final result. We prepared the report X. We did the financial statement Y, or we did the city code change, et cetera, things like that. All formal communications, as opposed to email or messages or verbal discussions. Does that make sense? Is that helpful or not?
So I think some people may see this from a different way. I'm all for this happening, and I'm not looking to, I'm not trying to pull this back because I think the city may get sued. My question is, in communication, official communication from the city that you may receive, like if you get an email from the city saying something, those types of things need to also include the gender neutral pronouns as well. And for me, basic communication, is that considered a document, or does that need to be included here as well? Or is that driven by city policy and then we can say that this can set that policy for the city? Is that a better explanation?
Yeah, and
I'm sorry, Chair Holtz, I have to wonder, Member Dressel, if the word all was deleted, if that I don't want to say comfort, but if that changes the perception of this, and if inserting somewhere documents including or written documents to address that comment you had about a hallway conversation where pronouns are used.
For me, it's not so much, verbal conversation. People are going to say what they're going to say. You can't stop somebody what comes out of their mouth. For me, it's like if somebody sends an email to the city council and the city council has to refer back to it and they don't have the exact pronouns, it's just I don't know how to phrase what I'm trying to put. This is perfect the way I think it is. I was just trying to make it a little better so that way we were more inclusive in the rest of the work that the city does. Does that make
And-
sense?
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe what we're doing here when we're looking at, do we remove all or keep the word all, is maybe really what we should do is we should talk about what we would like to have happen with this, and then and pass this to someone who could tell us if we need to change the word all, or if it's going to be fine with the word all, or whatever it happens to be, because I think these are things we don't necessarily know, and these might be things that other people who are working in writing this policy, or Mr. McConnell might be able to look at it and say like, oh no, I see an obvious loophole that this doesn't include, that from the intent you described to me, you do want to include.
Yeah, for me, it's just, yeah, I think Mr. McConnell needs to take a look at it and make sure that that's, it's not gonna, if we were to include it and to make it so that all the documents did that, that would be fantastic. I'm even more for raising the bar, is what I'm saying. I just don't, I'm playing devil's advocate because I've argued with enough people who tell me that, they don't use the pronouns, and it's like, well, and they intentionally go out of the way to try and do these things. And if the city were to hire somebody like this, I don't want them to intentionally try to misuse this in order to offend somebody in this case. Is that a little bit better, I guess?
I think I see what you're saying. I'm wondering if what our intention here, that we want to check with Mr. McConnell to make sure that this is going to cover our intention, is that this is all the documentation for the city of Gresham, and city of Gresham's like official stance or official communication is going to be gender neutral. Does that sound right? Okay.
Perfect. That's it. That's
Okay.
right on level. Thank you.
And Jane, would you be able to kind of write that in there and check in with Mr. McConnell with what Dana currently has to see if this fits, or if there's anything that needs to be changed because we've worded it weird, because we're not lawyers. Is the reality.
And just to be very specific, that I'm checking on the language of the amendment found on page 3 of Member Strode's memo.
That sounds correct to me. I don't have it in front of me. For some reason, I don't think I have that.
It's in the meeting packet.
I didn't find the meeting packet. I've been looking for quite a while now. I'm not willing to say that's on anyone but me, but I still haven't found it yet, is what I'm saying. So I'm gonna go off what you guys have read and what I'm hearing. So Member Stroud, did that sound correct? It was what?
That sounded great. And Member Dressel, it seems like it's particularly in the green font area that I inserted that we're talking about that shift in language. Anything that we think that Kevin or Jane or others might recommend in terms of getting the intent correct, but being encompassing of the official statements.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. Thank you all.
Okay, great. So that works for me if like it gets the go ahead through Jane and Mr. McConnell and whoever else needs to see it. That sounds great to me. Vice Chair Honor, I see your hand up.
The correction that we're talking about is in green, but it's also in action requested and explanatory statements. So whatever adjustments are made, if any, need to cover in every place. So that's one comment. The second comment here is if I have a brochure, I still think you need to have the word official correspondence as opposed to separate it out from draft notes or meeting minutes, or meeting notes or email between staff members, et cetera, et cetera. Those are not formal position statements by the city.
So maybe we need to add
see that.
Maybe we need to add a question there, which is, do we need to have official statements instead of, what is it currently? I think it's like
all future city documents.
So do we need to have official statements instead of all future city documents? to ensure our intent of this being the finished products and not the drafts or internal discussions around a draft.
It works.
And then
I
that way,
think that-
the people who know the right words to use will then be able to choose them and put them in there.
Yeah, I would assume the people in a PR department are already familiar with this, already working on these things and doing that forward. I just wanted to make sure it was clear in there. And again, I wasn't sure if, city policy needed to be kind of enforced through this or what, but definitely raising that bar up to that point would be great.
Yeah, Vice Chair Ardner.
I had one other question. If you're working on updating a brochure or a plan, and in there it said, we're not talking about charter, just any official document. In there it said, he did this or she did that, or he/she, that kind of stuff. And now we're going to update it because it's new. We need to apply this. Have we given license to say other adjectives or other descriptors? For example, instead of saying he or she, you could say the municipal judge, the police officer, the maintenance superintendent. Those are non-gender phrasing, and I would not want to eliminate them using that as a means of remedying the he or she question.
I also agree in the sense that maybe that's part of what we're talking about is the idea of, we're saying non-gendered responses or oh gosh, I just lost the phrase. Sorry guys, it's been a long day.
I mean, I feel like this mandate, the way it's currently written, allows for flexibility in how a person would use language, right? As long as you're not offensive or excluding a group, then it should be fine, whatever it is. They and them in the charter in this circumstance. But then for future city documents, it could be, we are looking for more people to fill this certain position and just leave pronouns out of it entirely. Like you were saying, it's up to how the city would do their marketing or their outreach or whatever, and then getting eyes on it to make sure that it's not being exclusionary.
Yeah, and that maintains the gender neutral feel, or the gender neutral statement, I guess, in that, if you just say the president or whatever, it is gender neutral in of itself.
Vice Chair Ardner, I'm gonna say this in the most simplistic of terms, and I just, because this is the analogy that I often use, and also in response to a few things that have been said here. The charter is like a directive to bake a cake. It is then up to you to decide if that is chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, buttercream, tiramisu, whatever. So the charter is bake the cake. The policy that then gets adopted, which is outside of the charter, is where you get into those other details.
So this may be one of
And
those things.
I don't mean to insult anybody with this analogy, but that's a descriptive I often use.
So this may be one of those things where we don't have to get deep into the weeds of the wording. We just need to make sure that our intent is getting across with the wording we're using. And then the policy is gonna have those very specific words that are gonna hold the weight of how it's implemented. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm very comfortable with that.
Okay. All right, that's
So-
good, because then that also lets our plan of having someone take a look at it and tell us if anything's wrong. Will kind of cover all these problems if someone who does this sees it and says like, oh, this is a serious problem. Otherwise, we'll just kind of, as long as it does what we're hoping for it to do, then we'll be good. Vice Chair.
Jane, just to see if I understood your comment, essentially you're saying the charter is the recipe and the any implementing directives would be in the Gresham Revised Code.
Potentially, yes.
And,
Yes.
and we use, by the way, we use the word city code. We should probably say Gresham Revised Code, just to be officially correct.
Great.
Thank you for that enlightenment.
Thank you all for strengthening this. Critique is an important part of the process.
So
So
this will be on your agenda for next week.
okay, that was going to be my question, which is this something that we can just say, look, if this goes through the people who need to see it and they approve it, we're good with it as is? Can we approve that today? Or, this is a conditional approval, right? Can we approve it assuming that everyone else says it's going to be fine? Because that works for me. I don't feel the need to see it again unless someone tells me there's something wrong with it. Vice Chair Ardner?
My only concern is that we somehow get the concept of official documentation instead of hall conversations into the intent.
And Jane, do you have that as a question for the intent? I believe we kind of worded that out.
I want to make sure I captured it. I have done the city's official communications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any other way you would word that, Vice Chair Ardner, to make sure that
No.
we're checking in? Okay, so we want to
No,
make
no,
sure
that's
that's the question we're checking in with. And there was another question to check in with, was it another one, or was it just the same wording of that twice? If I remember, same wording that. Okay, so yeah, it's just that wording that we want to make sure that's our intent and make sure that that's being accurately represented with what we're putting forward. And as long as that's the case, how does everyone feel about a conditional approval of that? So that we don't have to meet again before we send this forward. Does that work for everyone? Okay, so that's unanimous thumbs, which is not a way anyone likes to record our votes, but that's what we got. All right. I think that'll work then, Jane. Does that work for you? That this would count as approval from us unless there's any kind of problem that Mr. McConnell or yourself find with the wording.
Yes,
Okay.
I will fill. If there's any change to the wording of the amendment that you see on the top of page 3 of Member Stroud's memo, if there's any suggested changes to that wording, I will bring it back to you.
Perfect. And then we'll deal with that at our next meeting. So we'll throw it on the agenda at that point. Otherwise, then this will be ready to go to. Oh, it actually doesn't matter because our full committee's on the 30th, so we still have time either way. All right, perfect. All right. So we're right at 5 here, and I think we are down to other agenda items for future meetings. Does this sound right for everyone?
I will remind you, I have a hard stop about a minute ago.
All right, great. So let's do 30 seconds. Anything that has to be added for next agenda? Anything you need to update us on, Jane?
No, I will be bringing back to you for a formal vote on your districts. I'll be looking for homework assignments. And if there's any changes to the gender neutral amendment statement and explanatory statement, I will bring those back to you.
All right, great. Last check-in, the 25th. What time are we having it at? Are we doing 3 or are we back to 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. Okay, 1 o'clock it is.
Very good.
All right, great. Well, if nothing else, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. All right, I see no objection. All right, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
See you next
Bye.
week. Bye.